This video started as a very long essay about the power of music in video games. It covered a few of my favorite soundtracks in gaming, Persona 5, Risk of Rain 2, Dark Souls, Halo, etc., with an ultimate fixation on the two titles that I find to be the single most moving, impactful, and spectacular of any game. One of those two titles was Undertale, the primary focus of the entire video. I wrote a very large portion of it, but found it increasingly difficult to finish the script because even though that main focus was Undertale, I could not stop writing about the other of those two titles, Outer Wilds. Simply put, I'm obsessed. I even reached out to Andrew Prahlow, the man behind the ingenuity of the Outer Wilds soundtrack, for an interview or answers to some of my questions. He did leave me unread though, no shade, I still adore his work, so I didn't get anything out of it, but it was still worth an ask. But it wasn't only that, though, because I kept backtracking, rewriting, and losing focus on the point of the video. I was struggling to keep myself from unleashing my numerous opinions on the game itself, so that is now what this video has become. This video is an analysis of the story, themes, and gameplay of the game Outer Wilds. If you have not experienced this masterpiece, do not watch this video. Click away right now and play it. Outer Wilds is a knowledge-based game. The only way the player progresses is by learning more information about the world. Every spoiler for this story will directly take away from your enjoyment of it. Another note is that this will mostly be covering the base game of Outer Wilds, but I will be including a small section for the Echoes of the Eye DLC. So if you haven't played that yet, no worries, just skip it. I'll make sure to point it out when we get there. Now that the obligatory spoiler warning has been issued, it's time to dive right in. My first time playing Outer Wilds was about a year ago. I remember it vividly despite how long ago it was. I loaded it up and was greeted with the title song. I sat and listened to the entire thing, and it is still on my Spotify playlist to this day. In fact, it was actually my 5th most listened to song of the entirety of last year. After that, I clicked on the button to begin my journey and woke up at a campfire next to another of my character's kind, ready to embark on my mission to space, accompanied by my 4th most listened to song of 2023. No, this video is not about the music, but it is impossible to speak about the game without mentioning it at least a few times. The tutorial for Outer Wilds is nothing short of exceptional in my opinion. The model ship showed me how to fly, the kids with the radios showed me how to use a signal scope, the upper platforms taught me how to use my camera and probe, the anti-gravity caves taught me how to use my jetpack and maneuver in space. Aside from my translator, those are the only mechanics needed to play the game other than basic movement. Outer Wilds does something very smart with its mechanics and how simple they are. From the start, it's incredibly clear to the player that master mechanics is not how this game is played and beaten. There's no physical obstacle of any sort that requires gathering some sort of item or power-up, barring a single instance at the end of the game with the warp core. In fact, Outer Wilds can be beaten in under 20 minutes after launching it, although that's not made known to us then. Instead, we will soon learn that we need to use our knowledge and critical thinking in order to beat this game, and that is the only barrier. After getting the launch codes and my brain injected by a metric ton of psychic waves, I could finally blast off into space. Naturally, my first thought was to go to the Outer Rock, the moon of our home planet, Hearth. After talking with the other Hearthian who has decided to reside there, and checking at the location dial that points to the planets, a tune that I will be extremely familiar with in a very short while sets in, and all other sounds are suppressed. When the song reaches its end, I look to the side and the sun starts to contract and implode. My 22 minutes are up, and my time learning the game begins to be played back to me in reverse. That first loop accomplishes something unbelievable. It floods my brain with questions. Why did the sun implode? Why am I going back in time? Who are the Nomai? What makes this eye of the universe so important? And many more. We know the answers to all of these questions now, all of them with their own unique paths on how to solve them, and their interconnectedness to a bigger whole. That whole being the mystery of the Eye of the Universe and the Nomai race. Interestingly enough, other than the Nomai statue blasting you and grabbing the launch codes, the entire tutorial is actually optional. If a player doesn't want to talk to anyone or read anything, well, they don't have to. It won't get them very far in the real game though, obviously. Part of the magic of Outer Wilds is that there is not a single game like it in existence. As I mentioned in the introduction, it's unlike any other Metroidvania title in that every ounce of progress that you make is from reading, either from asking questions of the other Hearthians' recordings, or the relics left behind by the Nomai civilization. It's the only game where the only inhibitor of your progress is your own brain, the only game where you can beat it immediately, you just have to know how. But you guys know that already, don't you? I mean, I could sing the praises of every aspect of this game, from the movement, the art style, the sheer joy of exploration, the sound, and the music. Those things are important to, obviously, any game. It needs to be fun, it needs to be interesting and sound and look good. Outer Wilds has brilliant puzzles and that sense of accomplishment when you finally piece two clues together and have a wonderful moment of enlightenment. It has the movement and the music and the environment and the art style, but what drove it for me was the emotion. Specifically the emotion revolving around death. Outer Wilds is a game about death. It's an existential commentary on the meaning and value of life experienced through repeated death. But what does that even mean? Think for a minute about a scenario that we as players have just been thrust into. We exist in a solar system where our sun is imploding every 22 minutes, and afterwards, time rewinds back to the start of that 22-minute loop. We are the only ones who are stuck in the time loop and can potentially save all of our people. Now, think about what I believe to be the most emotionally devastating piece of information that you learn throughout the entire journey. Reaching the sun station is not an easy task, to say the least. We've traveled all throughout space, through Giants Deep, Brittle Hollow, and the Twins. Many of our puzzles are solved, but the biggest few still remain. Making our way through the station, we'll reach a roadblock. We have to travel through bare space with no ship, directly with the sun beating down in our faces, taking up the majority of our view and looming over us with the promise of death. Across the way is a tiny doorway we need to land inside to learn some of the last secrets in solving the mystery of the sun. You take that leap of faith only to discover that your entire quest to shut down the Ashwin Project was in vain. The Nomai failed. There was nothing forcing the sun to implode. It was at the end of its natural life cycle, and there's absolutely nothing that you can do about it. You, your friends, your people, are all condemned to death every 22 minutes because you were simply born too late. 22 minutes is not a long amount of time, and through almost all of our lives, a 22-minute segment of time is insignificant, a blip within a day maybe, and it's all we have left. What about the second most devastating piece of information, where shortly after discovering that civilization is doomed over on the sun station, you take a trip to the complete opposite end of the solar system and the icy contrast to the sun that is the interloper. Making your way through that will leave you with the knowledge that the Nomai were wiped out instantaneously by an eruption of ghost matter. They too arrived too late and died in an unpreventable disaster, except they didn't even have those 22 minutes. At face value, the philosophy regarding the death of the Nomai is incredibly depressing and sad. They gave up their lifestyle and settled down in a location that doomed them, all in the name of science and exploration, only to never reach their goal. Nihilists and cynics would proclaim this as just another story of life. We're born, and any goals that we set, any dreams we have, are more than likely worthless, because we probably won't achieve them, and we die in the end anyways. But the emotion I feel as a result of the story of the Nomai is the complete opposite. The Nomai were nomadic, always traveling with no real home to speak of, until they finally found a reason to stay. Their love for learning, their love for exploration gave them such a reason to live, that they literally chose to die repeatedly in search of it. Then, of course, there's you. The Nomai dedicated their lives to the eye of the universe, and it wasn't the right time for them. But their resources were the only reason that you were able to restart the universe and the circle of life. In my eyes, the sacrifice of the Nomai was not only extremely honorable, but beautiful as well. I'm sure that not everyone would make the same choices that the Nomai did when faced with the same scenario. If some omnipotent being were to say definitively to you, you are going to die before you finish all of your ultimate goals in life if you continue to strive for them, would you keep working towards those goals anyways? Interestingly enough, there's even a scroll on Brittle Hollow that questions whether what the Nomai was doing was actually the right decision. Even more, that question was asked by a young Solanum. But on a recording found on Solanum's shuttle, they state how they used to be scared. But now they understand that the universe truly bears no ill will, and they're ready to move forward now. On the Sun Station before the test of the Ash Twin project, it's noted that one of the scientists working on it was actually against the idea, scared at what would happen if it succeeded. When the project fails, that person really does feel sorry for the rest of the group, knowing how truly excited they were and disappointed that their progress has been lost. The Nomai held doubts about their work and their goals, but as a civilization they united together in the name of science and progress, and they dedicated their lives to making everyone else's better. The Ash Twin project in particular is the best way to exemplify the ideology held by the Nomai. They were so dedicated to solving the mystery of the eye that they designed a piece of technology that would send time 22 minutes back to the past after harnessing enough power from causing the sun to explode, so they continuously could fire a probe into deep space until it eventually reached the eye. They planned and expected to subvert themselves to death by sun implosion over and over and over again until they figured it out. They chose to live their lives through repeated death in the name of discovery and truth. This is the short section where I will be talking about the Echoes of the Eye DLC, so skip to this time frame to not get spoiled for anything there. Something that I found fascinating while playing through Echoes of the Eye was the juxtaposition between the Strangers' approach to finding the Eye, as well as their potential deaths, to the Nomai. While the Nomai were a nomadic race and really had no place to call home, the Strangers did have their own planet, a place that they really loved and cared about, to the point they eventually created their own augmented reality VR space to relive it once they realized they could never return. Interestingly, the Strangers discovered the location of the Eye fairly quickly, something that the Nomai wasn't even able to accomplish, but when they found out that reaching the Eye would inevitably lead to their deaths, they became recluse and locked the Eye away, unable for anyone else to discover it. The Nomai were not only willing to use their lives as collateral to find the Eye, they spent countless amounts of time and resources to make it happen, only being stopped by scientific impossibilities and the interloper disaster. The thing is, we can't really blame the Strangers for their actions, right? As I mentioned before, I'm sure that many people, when faced with the same scenario, would be panicked, and if they could, do anything to prevent their deaths just as the Strangers did. This dichotomy of philosophies is written very well, in my opinion, and made exploring the story of the Strangers and the prisoner uniquely different from the Nomai, while still exploring the concept of death and the coping mechanisms people would use when faced with their inevitable demise. Inevitable demise is an interesting concept to think about, especially when experiencing a game such as Outer Wilds. Death in Outer Wilds, for you, is not permanent, unlike how it was for the Nomai or even for the Strangers despite their attempts to run from it. That is, until you reach the final act, and are given the choice to risk permanent death by taking the warp core to the Eye of the Universe, or give up on your journey. Should you die on that path, it is presumed that you would be dead, with no preservation system to safeguard you. Now, obviously I know it's a video game and you can just reset, but regardless, the game handles this situation unbelievably well. Now, I know I said this video wasn't about the music of the game, but I do really quickly want to touch on the sound design revolving around this warp core. When warping into the Ash Twin project, the music turns hopeful, mystical, and mysterious. It remains that way until you unlock the warp core from its hold, where it has likely been for millennia, until it feels the warm touch of your hand, which brings the mysterious music to a hasty halt. The seriousness of the situation has amplified as the music has quieted. No music will return until warping away from the Ash Twin project, where an unidentified track is finally brought to light as you reach your ship and head for Dark Bramble. Final Voyage, a modified version of the song we are all too familiar with, End Times, accompanies us until reaching the vessel. Final Voyage has the same melody as End Times, but the background synths give it a much more hopeful and determined vibe. You will quickly understand that End Times was brought with the end of a loop, but Final Voyage is truly the end of your journey. For me, the magic of that last loop on my quest to the vessel was one of my absolute favorite moments from my entire experience. Remembering back to that first run I talked about when I first experienced the time loop, I truly did have all of those questions about the world and the game, but I neglected to write the question that loomed over all of them. does this death matter? Now, immediately, I felt that no, it didn't, because I simply woke back up at the campfire a few seconds later and relaunched. But as I played, my death mattered more and more to me. I would reach a new location and would speedrun my reading, trying to absorb every instance of data, because if I missed something and the sun were to go out, I'd have to spend a whole separate loop coming back there. And what if I forgot to go back? What if I missed something key to solving something? What if it was sheer luck that I found an important place and wouldn't be able to recreate it? The first 5 or so hours were plagued by thoughts like this, narrowly avoiding death and totally freaking out when I would crash my ship. But just as those questions arose, they eroded back to nothing. I grew apathetic, almost. There became a time later in my journey that I was so stuck on how to get to the Ash Twin project, I was just throwing myself at everything, over and over, just trying to force myself into a breakthrough. Who cared if I died? I would come back anyways. Until that last loop. At the end of your journey, the only way to solve the mystery of the universe is to remove the warp core from the Ash Twin project and take a leap of faith that bringing it through the most treacherous area of the solar system will reward you with your answers. Will you sacrifice eternal safety and risk permanent death? Pulling out the warp core flipped a switch in my amygdala, and suddenly I was back to day 1. Does death matter? I was legitimately shaking on my way to Dark Bramble, especially because I knew exactly what would be waiting for me there. The anglerfish are fucking terrifying. I was recording footage for this video and trying to achievement hunt, and these things would still rock me to my core. The last section with 3 of them right before making to the vessel, where one wrong move and it's over, absolutely criminal game design. But it's perfect. Not only is making it through this part insanely rewarding and anxiety relieving, but the very real threat of dying to them completely brought out the very real fear of death in me that would be impossible to recreate under any other circumstance. The final loop really does bring you back full circle. There are 2 more, lesser-known philosophies regarding life and death in Outer Wilds. When you embark to Giant's Deep, there's a strong possibility that you will encounter Gabbro, another member of the Outer Wilds Ventures, lying down in their hammock. Through the game, we will encounter projection stones with data on them that show us visions from different parts of the solar system. One of these is an Ash Twin vision that shows 3 active Nomai preservation systems. One for you, one for the data stored in the probe seeking the eye, and one for Gabbro. Incidentally, Gabbro is in the same situation as you are. They too have been stuck in this time loop, experiencing the sun imploding over and over again. When we ask them how they have been dealing with the time loop, they just say that they meditate whenever things get a little too overwhelming. Giant cyclones surrounding you until the end of time? Just meditate and calm down to get through it. Repeated death by the sun? Stay calm. The time will pass anyways. Gabbro represents the fact that when faced with this hardship, we don't always need to run after it or conquer it. Sometimes all it takes is to calm down, breathe, and wait for the time when things are a little bit more manageable, because that time will always come, even in a situation as bad as his. The other of these 2 philosophies comes from Chert on Ember Twin. Their experience is much less likely to encounter, as you likely have to go out of your way to see how their thought process changes throughout the loop. Chert has been observing supernovas at an alarming rate, and will soon come to the same realization that you did, that the universe is at the end of its lifespan. Chert will have different dialogue based on how deep into the loop you are, starting out with suspicion, leading into panic and asking for alone time, and an eventual acceptance of death. I think it's important to show these 2 philosophies, as well as the other ones I've talked about, to kind of give some more perspective and show how fundamental these ideologies revolving around death are to the game, and to the different people you interact with. As we've seen, life and death are explored in a few different ways throughout the game. The different philosophies, the civilizations, and people reflect many of the philosophies real people would actually hold. This game is a commentary on life and death, and has the true goal of explaining the value of each. There is one more aspect of the game that I have yet to touch on that I want to, and that is the unrelenting world of Outer Wilds. The world is not only dangerous, it's realistic. In basically any other video game, the world revolves around the player. NPCs and characters interact with you only when you decide they can. The engine only renders chunks of the map that you are exploring. Items exist for you and you alone, and in some games, you can even change the difficulty, deciding the decision-making and stats of all of your enemies. In Outer Wilds, this isn't really the case, because, well, yes, There is a difficulty setting for the DLC, and there are NPCs that only talk to you when you talk to them. The world is on a loop that does not change for the player no matter what you do to try to stop it. The twins will always have the falling sand pillar, even if you don't go anywhere near them. Real Hollow will always fall apart into the black hole. The cyclones on Giant's Deep will throw the islands into the air indiscriminately. And the sun will always implode at 22 minutes, even if you're a million miles away. The world does not care about you. The developers made this decision extremely deliberately. In a very well-made documentary YouTube video that you should all watch after this, they made it a point to say that designing the world in this manner was actually a huge obstacle for them. To the world, you are insignificant. The uncaring nature of the game can make it frustrating sometimes, but in the end it only serves to further your experience as the player. You beat all the odds, and as a result you likely have been changed too. If the world was not as difficult, frustrating, unrelenting, or real as it is, then how could we bring what we learned there into our real lives? As one of my favorite tweets of all time reads, "We are not superior to the universe, but merely a fraction from it." In life, as well as Outer Wilds, it is by chance that we are here with the resources we have, so let's make the most of it. Outer Wilds has given you 22 minutes and is asking the question, what will you do with it? Whether that be resetting the universe or succeeding in school or work, making loving relationships, living to create the best memories, or even just meditating through it all. We have only been given a short amount of time. No matter what you do, just make the most of it. And remember that we all die in the end anyways. Even just 22 minutes could make the difference, so take that chance, make that leap, and do your best. Just don't forget that it's always a good idea for you to stop and smell the pine trees along the way.